Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of the Shooting with the Shooters interview series. My name is Big Red 310, and my guest at this moment is
Daniel, also known as DanielTalksPuroresu, or Daniel, written in basically katakana letters on a bunch of forums. But yeah, just call me Daniel. It'll be cool.
the artist formerly known as Ichiban PURORESU and currently known as DanielTalksPuroresu. So let's get it right off. Let's get things started immediately with the first question I ask every guest. Daniel, how did you get into pro wrestling?
All right. This is going to be probably quite strange and probably completely different to most people. In that, when I very first saw pro wrestling, I would have been about maybe 5 or 6 years old, and I would have seen it at a friend's house, and I thought nothing of it. All I really thought about was, how I was going to fight him 10 minutes later when we got bored of watching it, and ended up replicating it in the backyard. So for me, that was my first introduction to pro wrestling, and it wasn't really on TV in Sydney at any sort of prime time. So, if you wanted to watch it, you had to sort of go and rent a VHS or something from a video store, or at least that's how I sort of saw it. And I had no interest in it at all, really. In high school, I used to mock the people that were fans of pro wrestling. Particularly, you'd get the guys saying, "If you smell what the Rock is cooking," in class and that sort of thing. I used to just call them basically idiots. So for me, pro wrestling was just like a sideshow for strange things. But then the guy that sort of, in a way, got me into pro wrestling from a long way away from it is Van Damme, and not Rob Van Dam, Jean-Claude. I saw a movie called Kickboxer, which is loosely based on Muay Thai, very loosely based on it. And basically from that point of time when I saw that, I would have been about 14 years old. I just fell in love with martial arts completely. I think that night I ended up bugging my friend to watch the rest of his Van Damme VHS collection. And then I sort of took up Shotokan Karate and a bit of Muay Thai then. And from there, I sort of got into basically the rest of martial arts. Big fan of Bruce Lee. And basically, I was convinced at one point in time that I was going to be a martial arts superstar like Van Damme and Bruce Lee. So I didn't quite get there. But that was sort of the lofty ambition. And then I sort of got into competitive fighting. Started off with sort of standard Western boxing and then a bit of kickboxing. And once you get into that, you got to start training properly with guys that really know the business and know the stuff. And so then I was showed some stuff from K1. This would have been about maybe 2003, 2004. So it's the days of guys like Masato, Mark Hunt, Peter Graham, who's an Australian, Ramon Deckers. Then you sort of had some of the sort of more golden era guys that I've seen on tape, and like the whole series of big name K1 guys. But those guys also fought in MMA, and I watched them go into MMA and lose. And I myself had basically a mixed style fight against a judoka and lost. Like, that's a guy who does judo. So then I sort of thought, well, maybe I better start learning about this sort of wrestling and grappling business. So I sort of followed guys from K1 into things like rings and Pancras. There's early days of rings. There were guys like Fedor Emelianenko, who you guys would probably know, Ricardo Arona, Evil, even Henderson, Hendo, he was there. Charles Sonnen, he started off in Pancras. And of course, for those who don't know, Pancras was actually founded by pro wrestlers. That's Suzuki Minoru and Funaki Masakatsu. So basically, I got into pro wrestling accidentally by thinking it was shoot. I ended up watching things like Rings, which was Worked when it first started, and UWFI. So it was sort of an accidental introduction to pro wrestling. And one of my first sort of pro wrestling idols was actually Sakuraba Kazushi, because I just really liked the fact that he came down to the ring with some extravagant entrance music, and he beat all the Gracies because I hated the Gracies at that point. So then I just wanted to watch everything Sakuraba, which included his pro wrestling stuff. And then basically someone broke to me, "Hey, Daniel, that's fake. That's not real." And I was like, "No way, man, no way." But then I eventually found the internet, found out it was, and then sort of learned more about grappling and So yeah, about 2006, I guess. Then I sort of started really getting into shoot style pro wrestling, and then sort of from there, slippery slope into Pro Wrestling Noah, and then the rest of pro wrestling sort of since then.
Now that transition from shoot to work, like how did you handle that transition, and how nowadays how much shoot stuff do you watch, if any, MMA or anything of that sort?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because a lot of people, when I was into mixed martial arts and kickboxing K1, a lot of people then were into pro wrestling, and a lot of those people are now into MMA and the UFC because of the sort of popularity boom of it. I've sort of gone the other way in that these days I hardly watch any UFC stuff. I'll watch a bit of some of the lesser known Japanese promotions because I like seeing some of the pro wrestlers in it. So like, there's a promotion called ZST, which comes from the lineage of Maeda, who started rings beforehand. Other things like Heroes. But yeah, I watch some MMA, but I'm not a big fan anymore.
And would you say it's because just the elements of pro wrestling, they've engulfed you in such a way that you love that more than you did used to love MMA?
I'm not sure if it's any more of a love. I mean, a strange story I often tell is when I was getting into like Pride FC in 2005, I used to actually run at about 3 a.m. in the morning. I was living in Reading, which is in England, and so the time zones were terrible. And to watch it, I used to have to go to, there was this Japanese guy who ran like basically a sushi bar, and late at night, she'd be showing the fight. So I used to run about an hour and a half through the Berkshire countryside, in moonlight, basically, just so I could watch Pride events because I didn't have an internet connection that could help me at that point. So I was massively into it, and so I'm not sure if I'm more into pro wrestling, but it's I think since MMA has changed a lot in that time, and it's become more of a mainstream sport, and in the process has lost some of the sort of magic and mystique that it used to have. Whereas pro wrestling now, I sort of see more. Sounds like a silly word to use, but I see more depth in it, and there's sort of finer points that you can really sort of get your teeth into.
All right. And you briefly mentioned getting on the internet when you found out about worked the shoot style promotions that were worked. Mm-hmm. So how did you get into this little wrestling community that we kind of have now?
I can't remember exactly, but I think it's got something to do with in the really early days of sort of looking stuff up on YouTube. I think this would have been about maybe end of 2006 or early 2007. I found a couple of guys talking about some of the things I knew about ProRes, and they were sort of factually incorrect. I don't remember the exact situation, but I remember sort of being sort of mildly irritated by these people sort of being factually incorrect, essentially. So, feeling full of self-righteousness and, some sort of philanthropic exercise to improve everyone's knowledge, I started sort of commenting every now and then on sort of various videos around YouTube. And really, I guess it was more, I ended up speaking with a guy called, I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's called like Smokey or something, who I sent him a comment one time, and he said, "Oh, you should make videos talking about Japanese pro wrestling." And originally, I was going to, sort of call him on Skype or whatever, and we'd sort of talk together about it. But that sort of never came into fruition. So I just sort of decided to start. That was the old Ichiban ProRes channel.
Yeah, well, before the Ichiban ProRes channel, I'd actually been involved in a couple of private MSN groups, which were actually mostly Japanese language based. But I had a couple of friends that were Japanese that sort of got me into the sort of more pro style of pro wrestling. Those guys sort of invited me in and sort of tried to speak in English as much as possible. So those were basically the guys that sort of showed me around the various pro wrestling stuff before I ended up sort of, talking about it on YouTube and, other forums around the net.
Did you always know Japanese?
I always knew a really small amount because when I was a young teenager, my mum was basically trying to become a professor. She was an academic, so she was in the middle of doing a PhD and had 4 kids. So she actually hired a Japanese au pair, which are sort of like nannies that live with you, and they, in this case, they often took care of my youngest brother and sort of looked after him during school time or whatever. So I had a lot of exposure to Japanese culture before then, and I could sort of say hello, goodbye, please, thank you, and let's eat, itadakimasu. But I never really had a high level of language ability until I sort of got into actually wanting to learn the language.
Okay, so we kind of breached about how you got into wrestling and the internet. Now, did you ever have, while you were learning the pro wrestling business, did you ever have a like WWE experience, or did that come when you were already kind of where you are now?
Um, uh, I think the only experience I really had of the WWE was the video games because my brother bought one. I think it was SmackDown Shut Your Mouth, which is
Awesome.
absolutely priceless entertainment actually.
Yeah.
It's a very fun game actually, and I think that was sort of my first introduction to sort of contemporary WWE. I knew about WWF, but I just never really had any interest in it.
Okay. And so, like as far as watching the WWF product or the WWE product, when did you really start watching what was going on? If you ever started watching.
Probably probably about midway through 2010, I guess. I started checking a few things out, sort of more regularly. I mean, I'd seen certain big matches on YouTube and things, but I really never followed it until about 2010. And like, sort of, it's been gradual since then, sort of starting to watch more things. Even now, I don't really watch any more than maybe an average of an hour of WWE a month. And I only watch the matches. I don't sit through the whole television shows. So my exposure to their overall product is pretty small, but I'm trying to watch as many matches as I can.
Okay. And were there any other promotions, non-Japanese, that you started watching as you were getting into the wrestling business?
Yeah, TNA, funnily enough, because when I was in the UK, we used to go on holidays to a place called Future Ventura, and the rich person that lent us his house for the period had cable TV, which happened to have the wrestling channel on it, and the wrestling channel happened to show a lot of TNA, and I think ROH, but I don't remember ever really watching terribly much ROH. But TNA was interesting from the point that I think Kurt Angle had joined them at that time, and they seem to be a bit of a car crash in terms of TV entertainment. So my younger brother quite liked it, and I thought it was an interesting athletic spectacle. But we were much more drawn to the sort of Noah and incidentally Dragon Gate that was shown at that time.
Okay. And so as you started watching more and more Japanese pro wrestling, what was the first Japanese pro wrestling promotion that really caught your attention, that made you say, wow, I really like this stuff?
Probably, technically, I'd have to say New Japan Pro Wrestling because they were the sort of first ones I watched of pro style as opposed to shoot style, where I suddenly thought, shit, this is really fun. And I don't even remember actually what I was watching, but I think it was Tiger Mask. It's sort of like the Tiger Mask 4 fairly recently. I sort of just liked the fact that he was throwing, karate kicks and that sort of thing. But the first promotion that I really followed seriously and started getting into was Pro Wrestling Noah. It took me a while to get into them. At first, I didn't like them, but once I did, like I sort of started watching as much as I could. I would say it's the first promotion that I sort of really became a fan of.
Around what time was this? 09, 08, 07?
Probably towards the beginning of 2007.
Okay. And now, basically, as a general, we're going to more Puro-centered talk here. I know you don't like that term, but for when you first started watching it compared to now, many people say that now PuroRes is kind of a little bit on the downswing. So when did you say your peak of interest in Japanese pro wrestling was, and when did you say would you say right now is your lowest point of interest?
Right now is definitely not my lowest point of interest. It's probably the lowest point of interest in current and contemporary Japanese pro wrestling, but when I first got into the pro stuff, I didn't really think it was very good because I had no sort of way of thinking about it other than these guys have shit technique compared with the shoot guys. That was really all the thinking I had about it. So I guess probably there was a period in about 2009 when I was supposed to be finishing my uni degree when I was watching a ridiculous amount of pro wrestling to the point when it was like I had 2 1 terabyte hard drives full of stuff. I had a stash of bootleg DVDs that basically filled the back shed, and I was getting through hours and hours of it every day. So that's probably by far the most intense sort of fan viewing I've done of pro wrestling. But I wouldn't say I love it any less now, but I've become more picky about things. So right now I'm pretty heavily into the 70s stuff, whereas back then I was into pretty much almost anything, which included sort of at the time Dragon Gate were probably the promotion I saw the most of.
Right now, or generally over the past 5 years, I would say, how much American indies have you seen, and what was your first thoughts of it when you saw it?
The first thing I saw with sort of awareness of it being an American indies match was I think it was Joe versus Kobashi, and at the time I thought, what the hell is this random Joe guy doing wrestling Kobashi, because I didn't know who Samoa Joe was. And I actually came at that via there was like some torrent thing for 5-star ROH matches or something, or the best 5 ROH matches, something like that. And I saw a few others, and it just wasn't really for me at that point. It wasn't stylistically interesting, so I just sort of filed it into the don't watch basket, and I didn't think about it in any sort of real critical sense at that point. It was just something I didn't really want to watch.
And how do you think of it now?
I think it's a real mixed bag because, like, what I think of as being the US Indies is as varied as something like Sami Callihan versus Alex Colon in CCW, which was basically like Samoa Joe versus Necro Butcher, but a slightly less violent version of it. And you've got everything from that through to what I saw recently, which was Eddie Edwards versus O'Reilly, which was sort of very measured, tempered down, fairly sort of standard, ring work and work rate sort of based matches. So it's quite a varied sort of area to look at. Pretty much the same as Japanese wrestling, and there's a lot of different sub styles. But I think the overall impression I get is that there are some really good guys, but there's a lot of guys that are fairly average, and a lot of it, like stylistically, isn't for me.
And now we're gonna get back to the indies portion, but I kind of wanted to bring this up because it's gonna kind of direct the rest of the interview. What do you look for in a pro wrestling match for you to consider to be very good or great, and the perception that people have of that?
All right. I was sort of thinking, because I knew questions like this would sort of come up. And it's difficult for me to really spell out in any sort of firm sense what I want to see, other than sort of the general things of what I think is, good. Like I want to see people selling things the way they want me to buy them. I want to see people, try to be expressive with their pro wrestling. They've got to entertain at the end of the day. So you can't sort of just mail home something that's fairly stock standard. So, like, aside from those things, like I can't sort of say I want my wrestlers to do lots of top rope moves or this or that, or I want them not to do lots of top rope moves. I can't be prescriptive because there's a big, broad range of things I can enjoy. I mean, I love Stan Hansen and Tenryu Genichiro, who basically just brawl. Whereas I also love guys like Volkan and Tamura, who are very technical, sort of work submissions and counters and that sort of thing. So there's no sort of set sort of thing of what I want wrestling to be. So it's difficult for me to really answer that question without sort of basically going into more or less how do I basically try to persuade other people about what I like and what I don't like. And there's a distinction here between what's called sublimity and taste. This was actually originally brought up by a guy called Immanuel Kant. It's some philosophical stuff. But it's also carried by, there's a French guy who's postmodern sort of aesthetics critic called Jean-Francois Lyotard, who talks about this distinction between taste, which can be anything. Like you can have a taste for strawberries. So I might say strawberries taste nice, but they only taste nice to me and in reference to me. Whereas I could say something like the rose is beautiful. And what I'm trying to say is the rose actually has a value that everyone should be able to recognize. So for me, there's a bit of a difference between pure taste and what's called sublimity. So if I say a match is 5 stars, yes, technically I'm saying I like it and it has a taste that's, good for me. But also I'm trying to say there's something about it that has a particular quality that sort of stands out almost objectively. There's a guy who I read called Cello, who talks about aesthetics as a search for objectivity, with beauty and sublimity basically being a quality of the object rather than purely a reaction from people. So, with that sort of background onto pro wrestling, in terms of trying to tell you what I think is good and what I want to see, those are sort of two slightly different things. What I want to see is in a way my taste, and what I think is good is in a way my, what I think is sublime, or the argument for sublimity, if that makes sense.
It does, and you posed a very good point there. Now, my other question is, if that is what qualifies what we were talking about, the sublimity aspect of pro wrestling, then if you think a match is bad, do you think therefore it has no value that shouldn't be recognized by anybody?
It depends. I mean, there's degrees between sublimity that should be recognized by everyone and sublimity that should not be recognized by anyone. I guess it sort of breaks the argument. To put it into context, like if you look at a lot of what Kant's work was about, which is where this, I'm not swearing by the way, Kant is how you're supposed to pronounce it. But basically it's this search for, there's a great Oscar Wilde quote if I can remember it. It's athleticism. So I'm thinking about pro wrestling. Aestheticism is a search after the signs of the beautiful, and it's something like the secrets of life come from that. I don't remember the quote exactly, but basically the idea is if we're to appraise something and try and explain what is good about it, we need to look in a way at what is actually present in the object itself. So when I'm sort of saying something is bad to me, sometimes that can be a taste thing, but sometimes I'm also trying to say that there are elements in the object itself that make that object not appealing to everyone, or that the rational person looking at it would see certain problems with it. So an example of a pro wrestling match would be Edwards versus Richards, where you look at the fact that there's the that big sort of air raid crash style move through a table on the outside, and then only seconds later, 30 seconds later or something, they're going through standard sequences and showing no effect of that. So I'm saying that sort of occurrence in the object itself means that the rational person looking at it, or anyone looking at it, would probably find a problem with that restricts its possibility to be considered something sublime or something sort of really excellent.
Fair assessment. This could... I get that this one wouldn't be easy to answer, but also explain, if you can just explain elements of what you think are important to what you consider selling and a narrative.
All right. The first point on selling I can get away with, I think, pretty easily. Sell things the way you want me to buy them. In other words, if you don't sell a move as important, I won't buy it as important. If you sell it as really dangerous, then I will buy into it as being really dangerous. And I think there's more to selling than just selling or not selling. There's degrees of quality in both. So we've had a discussion on the forums, the ProRes.tv forums. I'm sure will get mentioned a bit later about other aspects of selling. Whether like for example, if someone punches you and you sell that strike, whether that actual act of selling is in fact an aesthetic object itself, whether you can look at it and go, hey, that was a really cool sell of that elbow or of that punch. So that's one aspect of it, is just the visual of seeing someone pretend to be hurt. Sometimes that can be really quite interesting. The other aspect is, I guess, a way of selling threat, which creates tension. So if I'm always looking to avoid someone's kicking offense or whatever, I'm sort of in a way selling that that's a threat. So if it comes later, it has more tension built up in it, and you get a bigger reward from it. So there's all these different aspects of selling, and some people are better at than others. And yes, that's probably how I look at selling particularly. Narrative is a different beast, really, because I've gone 360 on that whole subject. When I first got into pro wrestling, didn't care about it at all. It was just technique, and seeing people get hit. But at some point I decided that there was a real sort of storytelling quality to it. And you could sort of see the way moves led to other moves and so on. But then I realized that I sort of felt dishonest about that, because you watch a pro wrestling match and it's just guys pretending to engage in a catch wrestling match. There are throws, there are slams, there are strikes, there are pins. None of that is particularly nuanced storytelling. It's not really getting across any sort of existential pain or any pathos. It's just stuff happening. It's essentially a martial arts movie played out in live form. It's not something crafted up by Lynch or by Ozu or whoever. It's not really storytelling craft. So I've sort of stopped thinking about those and sort of focused more on particular points that are pro wrestling specific. So continuity of selling, the psychology of a match being sound, that sort of thing.
Now, even though what you just said about sort of leaning towards away from the narrative, but would you also say that if a match has a particularly appealing narrative, it could add a lot to a match?
As a hypothetical, I imagine it might, but I can't think of any example where I've looked at pro wrestling as anything which was interesting from a storytelling viewpoint, AO ipso, like out of just the storytelling. None of it's really interesting. It's only interesting by the way they can actually pull the pro wrestling stuff out. So yeah.
Now, what about storylines that are building around a match? And some storylines can maybe build to some specific spots happening in a match. How do you value that stuff?
Not very highly. I think that's probably made pretty obvious by my previous answer. It's just that I think there's a difference between like what you could call storytelling is like Misawa's elbow being almost always sold as a knockout blow, that sort of thing. Like that's very limited and very modest storytelling, and it's really not there for any other purpose other than just to get sportive excitement out of when he uses it as a move in a match. So, I mean, a strange example would be, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, Dave Richards versus Edwards. I remember I saw on your channel the video highlights package they put together before the match. I guess it was sort of like hype for the fight. And I actually thought that was really quite well put together by pro wrestling standards, for sure. But I saw nothing in the match that really did anything like that. I mean, if you were to work that as a storytelling angle, what you'd be looking at is what sort of sad position must someone be in legitimately to have nothing in their private and personal life that's of any worth, such that pro wrestling and one particular match suddenly becomes this meaningful aspect for them. I mean, that could be an interesting short film, but the actual pro wrestling match had nothing to do with any of those elements of pathos, like human emotion. It was just a bunch of stuff happening in a choreographed fight. So I don't think there's ever much connection beyond those sort of move psychology things, which I subsume within sort of psychology. Yeah.
Well, what about like what if a match, and I'm not saying I want this all the time. I'm just bringing this up to see what you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
For matches that the conclusion of a match specifically end a specific storyline. And in that sense, the whole storyline, the whole building up to the match was a part of the build up to a storyline. Do you find any value in instances like that, if any?
I think there could be some, particularly from a business point of view, in terms of getting people to buy into it. The same way that, if you look at the way soap operas work, a lot of them towards the end of the series start trying to suggest a second series. I mean, that's to put in the minds of the producers that they should fund another series, but it's also to put in the minds of the fans that you need to keep watching this to sort of unravel more of these untied and loose ends. So I can see business value in it, but in terms of whether or not I'm going to enjoy the match, I'm not sure. And whether a match becomes sublime in that sense, I think it might be something like the icing on top of the cake, maybe. If there's no cake to begin with, and it's not going to have very much. But I mean, I guess it can add a small amount in certain circumstances. But as I said, I wouldn't really put any emphasis on it.
And so let me say this: with what we've been talking about storytelling and selling and specific moves in a context, what about matches like Money in the Bank ladder matches and TLC matches and stuff like that? Are these matches from the get-go doomed to fail because you know that a high amount of spots have to be done in the match and quite a little bit amount of selling has to be done because they constantly have to get back up and do more spots?
Well, I guess what you're asking is whether a stunt fest can be good. I think there's a sort of like a brick wall limiter. It's a music analogy for people on the sort of quality you can get out of that. Like to use my percentage stuff, it would be very, very rare for like a stunt fest or spot fest style match to get much beyond 80, because it's not really going to be able to build that much tension and excitement in you. I mean, the Money in the Banks I really enjoyed, actually, because like some of the bumps the guys were taking were absolutely harrowing. It was really quite violent, the spectacle of them, the 2011 ones. And I mean, those things are worth watching in pro wrestling. I mean, those things are entertaining. Those things are enjoyable. So they have a certain quality to them. And I think it's important for them to also sell stuff. Like one example, although it probably wasn't selling, it was probably just coincidence. But when Sheamus, I think he powerbombed Mystico, whoever the hell Mystico is, through Sin Cara, that's it, through the ladder. I mean, he got carried out, and that sort of sold the effectiveness of that huge spot. When Rey Mysterio stacked it off the ladders, he didn't get back up and challenge Del Rio before pulling the belt down. He basically stayed out of the match, and there's got to be some element of selling in them, otherwise they become a bit ridiculous. But I mean, it's one of those things where if you basically just have crazy plus a lack of complete non-selling, so long as it's like just a little bit of selling, then it can be quite enjoyable.
All right, now let's bring in a factor that me and you have gone back and forth on at one point. What is your value of crowd reactions to a match and what they can add or detract from a match?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is there's a difference between essentially the soundtrack of a pro wrestling match, which is the noise a crowd makes during the match, and the opinion of the crowd. So if the opinion of the crowd is, I think this match is a 4.5-star match, I don't care, because in that process, they're making a claim about sublimity. They're making a claim about aesthetics. So, it's not like their opinion matters any more than mine. It's sort of it's just coincidental information. But in terms of when you're watching the stuff, if the crowd is an organic heat, you're going to enjoy it more inevitably, because it builds up more excitement in you, sort of almost subconsciously, I guess. And equally, I guess if a crowd is completely dead, or if they're chanting annoying shit through the match, it could hurt your enjoyment of it. So in that sense, yeah, I factor it in somewhat, because it affects my enjoyment of the matches. But as you well know, and for those listening, that I really don't care what the fans of the product think in terms of my ratings of things.
All this selling, narratives, specific points of a match, all the stuff that gets you and Aaron and people like you to rate matches a specific way, there's a sort of perception towards you guys. How do you view that perception, and do you think it's accurate?
I'm still a little unclear about exactly what the perception is. Truthfully, I mean, there's what people say, and then I'm still not sure exactly what people truly think. I mean, I think there's a tendency for people to think that it's narcissism in a way, that we think we're better than other people and we want to denigrate their opinions and all that sort of thing. And in that sense, it's not, I guess it's almost like an imagined or conditioned feelings of inferiority in regards to these, smart ProRes fans. I mean, it struck me when Sanders Robbins sort of gave Aaron that sort of most intelligent YouTube guy, whatever award. It sort of seemed really quite strange to me, is that that's not really an award you'd normally expect to be given to people that are discussing pro wrestling. It's a strange one. And you see lots of people, Aaron being criticized for being over analytical and these sorts of things. It seems like it's very similar to anti-intellectualism. But in this case, as I try to explain to people, it's got nothing to do with intellectual might. It's got nothing to do with superiority of fan taste. It's just that when you go out and you branch out and you watch lots of pro wrestling and you discuss it with lots of different people and you have to defend your viewpoints on it, you tend to become slightly more aware of what sort of things in a match are defendable as opinions and what sort of things aren't. And I think when we sort of are criticized as being overcritical, or other people just flat out criticize us as being biased or haters or whatever, I think it's I don't know. I just think it's misdirected. I mean, people should come onto the forums and discuss things with us. I mean, then they can have an opinion, because the way I read people talking about us, it's almost as if we're the wrestling KO people that Aaron talks about. And for those guys, yes, a Reich and Berlin style collective narcissism would apply to them, because in a way they are very protective of their own group identity, and they will basically you can't get on their forum unless they let you on. And behind those sort of censored and closed walls, they take sort of spiteful remarks about anyone that's anyone on the IWC. So those guys maybe. And those guys aren't ProRes fans. In fact, if anything, they're actually anti-Japanese wrestling. They're much more lucha fans, particularly of the sort of more maestro style of, like Black Terry is one of their favorites from IWRG and other indies there. So I think it's an inaccurate perception, basically.
And when you talk about defending your viewpoint of a match, because this is where I think a lot of the criticism comes from. I think a lot of people enjoy a match, and I think that they don't really know. For some people, they don't really know how to accurately express why they enjoy a match. So when you go up to someone and you say, "Well, why did you like that match?" and they say, I mean, they struggle to say why, but they just come out with, "Well, I enjoyed it." How far does that go, in your opinion, of an actual defense? That sometimes people, they just enjoyed a match and that's why they liked it.
I've got no problem with people enjoying things. No problem whatsoever. I mean, look, I enjoy a lot of absolute shit. Van Damme movies, for example. I love them. It's absolute shit, but I love them. If someone comes and asks me, I mean, I'm a massive film fan. I love all sorts of really nerdy shit. But if people came up to me and asked me, "Why do you like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies?" I'd just be like, "Man, when I was a teenager, it was the coolest thing." That's not a really good explanation for sublimity, but it just so happens to be what I think. And so I have no problem with people liking things. I think there's a bit of disingenuous nature when people sort of accuse us of being opinion Nazis, because the one example I can think of would be to mention that Aaron's over analysis is for virgin stuff. The guy who basically did that's a guy called Luke, and he was on the forums for a while, and he had no problem. For example, there was the Orton versus Henry match, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but he basically called it shit and said that none of us should have liked it. So this is the same guy that when Aaron has very measured and sensible reasons for criticizing a match, gets in trouble for apparently being over analytical. This guy at the same time is very happy to say that a match that everyone likes for good reasons is shit for no apparent reason at all, and that we're all idiots for liking it. So like if you're to look at the people that will complain about that sort of thing, typically they're less reasonable than us. I mean, if someone says, look, I can't explain why I like it, but I like it, we're just not going to really talk with them very much because, you know, it's not very interesting. But we're not going to try and rip their heads off or anything.
All right. And I want to bring this up as well. When it comes to, because I brought this up in one of my videos a while back, that there's also this perception on the internet that if you overrate something, you're a moron. But if you underrate something, it's, well, you know, he viewed the match differently. I think people feel that when they do not like a match as much as everyone else, they do not get as harped upon as much as they like a match more than everyone else. Do you agree that there's this perception kind of rolling around in our community?
Yes, I do. I think it makes sense in a way, and it's strange you'd bring that up. But definitely it's easier to be more critical of something, because then if people disagree with it, well, you come across as, slightly more of the aficionado who's got the more, demanding tastes. Whereas if you overlord something, you praise it more than it's worth, then you seem like this idiot who has, no, no critical capacity. So I can see that, but again, I think I'm often someone that praises something a lot more than other people like it, because as I found out, I have an opinion that's a minority across the broader internet wrestling community. It's for me to say something like Volkan versus Tamura in '97 is one of the best matches ever, is going to get absolutely no traction with most WWE fans, no traction with the ROH fans, and only mixed traction with the fans of Japanese pro wrestling. So I'm quite used to both sides of it, really. But I see the point, and it's an interesting one.
Now I want to basically, we've talked a lot about how you view pro wrestling and such. So I want to say, of the American indies that you've seen, who are some of your favorite guys? Who are some guys that when you watch them, you are like, I enjoy what they're doing, and I think they are good at what they do?
The first one was actually Dean Ambrose / John Moxley, I think he was before he was Dean Ambrose. I saw him and I was like, shit, man, this guy is really, really, really good. I saw him in a match with Austin Aries in Evolve. And then maybe a month later, I found out that he was signed by the WWE. He was in the developmentals, and I saw the FCW matches. He worked with Rollins, who I think is Tyler Black, and then his match with Regal. I'm like, man, this guy's actually legitimately exceptionally good. I mean, there are heaps of other guys as well. It's not like the American indies are short on talent. It's just that they seem to sort of be spread out in weird places. Like I really like Sami Callihan. Low key can deliver some good stuff. He carried Tiger Mask 4 a couple of times. Carried Kanemaru to a really good match once in Japan. I mean, even guys in TNA like AJ Styles, that James Storm guy. There's heaps of good guys. It's just that often that they don't seem to be able to be in an environment where they can work together and really produce good stuff.
The Dean Ambrose Austin Aries match is actually a match I really, really like. So it's nice to know that someone else found that, because that's not a very talked about match on this community. Who are some guys that, I mean, obviously we talked a lot with Aaron about Davey Richards, and we'll talk about him as well if you want, but also besides Davey, other guys who are sort of kind of the biggest representatives of the American indies that you don't really like?
Well, I mean, the thing is, Davey Richards has become a bit of a meme across some aspects of the internet, in that the sort of reputation of Davey Richards is grander and bigger than the actual guy himself. But, I mean, I could name almost anyone. I mean, of the ROH guys that are fairly high up in the roster, Eddie Edwards, Roderick Strong, both of them have many of the same problems that Davey Richards has, from my point of view. And the problem with these guys actually is that they're indistinguishable from one another. Like you can't look at Roderick Strong and say Roderick Strong has a completely different philosophy about pro wrestling to Eddie Edwards, to Davey Richards. They all sort of meld into this one sort of tape trader style, I guess is what it's called. But I mean, the David Richards is the biggest example because he's the one that gets talked about as being a great pro wrestler when he really, really isn't. And that's the one which comes to mind most regularly because he's the one that gets talked about a lot. Other guys like Danielson that get a lot of love, I mean, you can see the reasons for it. And, you know, even though I don't particularly like him as much as other guys tend to, like I can see it's reasonable. And the same for Prime Samoa Joe and that sort of thing. So it's really only the modern crop that I think there's a big discrepancy between, you know, what the sort of indie fans tell me about him and what I think I'm seeing from his work.
Going back to Japan, who are some of your favorite workers from there? And again, who are the guys that you feel aren't really that good, but they get a lot of praise?
My favorite workers changes all the time. Look, I'll tell you the guys who I really like who tend not to get much attention. That's probably a good way of going about it. The first one that comes to mind at the moment is I'm pretty big into Muhammad Yone. He's produced some good stuff, and most people think he's shit. So that's an example. There's also Sano Naoki, who's also known as Takama. So Takama Sano. Who else? Alexander Otsuka, who often works in the smaller promotions, sort of shoot star worker. I think he's really good. Tamon Honda would be another example. He produced some awesome stuff in Noah and severely underrated. And then there's sort of the guys that are well rated in some areas of the community, but not in others, like Volkan, Tamura. Even some of the big names like Barber, I think sometimes is underrated. Taue we did a project on before. Even guys like Hashimoto sometimes don't get the attention that I think they probably deserve. Tenryu, big one. Fujiwara, Fujinami. Oh, geez, there's so many.
And who are the modern big names? Like there's the Tanahashis, there's the Shiozakis, there's the Kentas, there's the Seguras. Who are the basically all the champions and all the uppercut guys? Who are the guys that get a lot of praise that really shouldn't, and who are the guys that actually really do deserve it?
Well, I think Shiozaki's the guy who I've soured on terribly. I mean, it's one thing not to produce wrestling that is appealing to Daniel Bamford, right? But there's another thing to produce the sort of style of match that has become so repetitive that even the fans of Shiozaki are sitting there in the stadium silent, you know. So, and he's not been a good champion. I don't think his work has longevity, and he gets a fair amount of positive attention from various places. I think Marufuji's one of the guys that gets a lot of love, and I just don't understand it. He's not terrible, but he can be really frustrating if you actually have to watch him more than once a year. In terms of guys like Kenta and Tanahashi, you know, I don't like Tanahashi at all, but I've got to pay the guy at least the respect that he busts his ass, John Cena style. You know, he really puts in the effort in the big matches, and it's sort of like, in a way, it's not his fault that he's not a great worker. He tries hard, and he's okay, and you know you can't really hate on him. I think he deserves the position he's sort of got in the business. And I think it's the same for Kenta. I mean, Kenta's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes he's great to watch, other times he's annoying. But at least he can produce some really good stuff. So, yeah, I think those guys probably deserve their spot. Whereas, you know, I'd question guys like Shiozaki. I think he's only there because he's 6'1" and relatively good looking. But, you know, he doesn't really have much in terms of the sort of in-ring stuff.
I told this to Aaron. We talked about this a lot. I've never been a Shiozaki fan, ever. And his current stuff, not a fan of that either. So, not surprising. And also,
yeah.
Also, what about, because I remember back in like June, July, when I was on the forum for a little bit, everyone was talking about how Noah really fucked up on Morishima. And now Morishima's the champion. So how did you think that transition went, and what do you think of him now?
Well, the Morishima being fucked up by Noah thing was really an idea sparked by Josh Larrabee, who runs a whole like a million YouTube channels under different names. he's really the one that sort of started that. It's complete nonsense. There was never a point at which Noah absolutely screwed Morishima over. There was a point when they gave him the belt, and then he basically got into really poor shape, poor conditioning, and he was producing pretty much shit in the ring and not giving his best, so they stripped him of the belt. And that's the fault of absolutely no one but Morishima Takeshi, who's got himself to blame for that. But the way they've transitioned to it now, the way I see it is, it's just, it doesn't matter who's got the belt there at the moment. They're doing steady business based upon the name of the brand and basically the quality of the workers they've still got. It doesn't really matter who's got the belt. I mean, Shirozaki's had it, so Morishima's a step up from that, I think. But the match, the title transition for that was pretty terrible, and I don't think it sort of bodes well for the next couple of years. Like, I don't think we're going to get a resurgent GHC heavyweight championship, but you never know.
All right, very quickly, let's give very quick thoughts on the current promotions. I will name them, and you'll just give me basically what your current viewpoint of them now and what they do, what they need to do to improve, if anything.
Sure.
New Japan.
I'd like to see shorter main events, and I'd like to see a lot more non-finishers. I think the obsession with clean finishes has gone too far for New Japan, and they need to sort of reset their style a bit.
Then overall, what do you think of the actual quality of it, though? Good, bad, okay?
It's been fine. I think it's been good.
Noah.
The problems there I won't even begin to get into. It take too long. In terms of what they're doing right, well, that they produce a lot of genuinely good matches because they've still got a lot of really good workers there. But you know, the overall quality has been really mixed. You get a lot of good matches over the course of the year, but watching a whole show would not be a recommended thing for people to do.
All Japan.
They get a lot of positive vibes from some people. I just don't like what they do. A lot of their matches are really dry template stuff, and I would say outside of maybe one or two of the sort of Green Boy matches last year, nothing was interesting to me.
Big Japan.
Interesting in that they tend to bring through the rookies a lot quicker than the other promotions do. They had a really good thing going with Shinobu and Sasaki Yoshito. That was last year. They sort of had a feud. That was good. Had a couple of really good tag matches as well between sort of the invading All Japan team featuring evil Fatso Hammer. But yeah, overall a fine quality for an indies, but nothing sort of to write home about.
DDT.
They're actually doing pretty well for themselves from a business point of view, actually. But they had Dick Togo at the beginning of 2011, so that was some awesome stuff. But yeah, outside of that, they tend to be some of the worst aspects of Japanese indies wrestling sort of combined and represented. So a bit of a mixed bag.
What's its name? 0-1.
0-1. Oh, they've got Hashimoto Daiichi, who's the son of Shinya. So he gets a lot of attention, and he actually looks like a decent proposition. I wish they'd focus more on him, and I guess the overall quality of their work has been very mediocre. Like, nothing is terrible and nothing is brilliant. It's all just sort of middle of the ground sort of stuff.
And one of the big ones that gets a lot of recognition, and maybe it shouldn't. I don't know. I don't watch much of it from the regular American Indies community. What about Dragon Gate?
Well, I've sort of stopped watching them regularly over the last sort of 12 months or something because I've sort of grown sick of watching basically their style. Like, their style is inherently flawed in a way. It could only go so far, and it was doomed to failure in the same way that the King's Road was eventually doomed to sort of collapse in on itself. But you can only do fast, spotty so many times before it becomes repetitive and boring. And so I've only seen the pimped matches, and of the sort of pimped matches, none of them really did anything for me. So it's not a promotion I really have much to say about.
Now, of all your promotions that we just talked about, what is your current favorite?
Right now, maybe Noah, just based on pure, sentimentality. Really.
All right, hey, that's a good enough reason to like any promotion. Of the last year, in 2011, I know you watch a lot of matches. So if you could just very quickly, your favorite American Indies match, your favorite Pro Wrestling match, and even your favorite WWE match, if you remember.
All right. If I can include TNA in the Indies, am I allowed to?
Put TNA as well on its own separate category.
All right. Well, the Indies would be Finlay versus Callahan. That
Great.
was fucking beautiful.
Great.
TNA gets its own category because they are so shit, but they did produce one nugget of gold in amongst that shit, and that was Bully Ray versus AJ Styles, which was frightening, but had this really harrowing, bleak feel that was, quite beautiful in its own peculiar way. My favorite WWE match was actually Mark Henry versus Bryan Danielson, the SmackDown cage match.
Yeah.
I love that perhaps more than anyone else. Because for me, pro wrestling is about that sort of sportive excitement, and they somehow managed to get that out of escaping a cage, which I don't think I've ever seen before. When like Brian is trying to climb over Henry basically to get out, I was losing my shit for that. So I like that more than the sort of big spectacle, lots of finishes, lots of kickouts of sort of CM Punk versus Cena. The favorite Japanese match is Nakamura Shinsuke versus Suzuki Minoru, which I think was August 14th. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I think that was the date. It was the G1 Climax final. That's actually the closest the match has got to 5 stars for me for a long, long time. I really, really liked it.
What was your percentage of it?
88. So
Wow.
a point and 1 point away from sort of getting in there. So.
And what was the? There was another one that I believe you gave good praise to. That was a little earlier in the year. Was that the? Gosh, it was so long ago. I have a problem remembering. It was the one that everyone. It was the one that everyone in the regular YouTube community watched and loved as well. I forget what.
It's probably Nakajima versus Suzuki.
Yes. There you go.
Yeah, that's the one. I really like that. Although I'm sort of dreading rewatching it because at the time of watching it, what I really liked was the fact that Nakajima was beating the piss out of Suzuki, and you got these, a series of really well-timed counter spots. So I'm a big mark for counters, but there were negatives to it, mostly resting on Suzuki being thoroughly useless. So I don't know if I'll like it as much if I watch it again, but I will, I will watch it again, and it'll be interesting. I certainly liked it the first time round.
And we spoke about your WWE match of the year, but what were your thoughts of kind of the highlights of the WWE's, like what most people would say were the best match of the year, like the John Cena, CM Punk, the Undertaker, Triple H, stuff like that?
Undertaker, Triple H was really tedious for me. You've got, basically what they did is they tried to run through a series of hardcore spots to replace what would otherwise be mat work or whatever. And that can work, but it can also backfire. I think in this case it backfired because it killed all of the momentum they tried to build up, and then it basically just switched to exchanging finishes. I mean, they sold things, but there's only so many times you're going to sort of try and work a match around 2.9 near falls and get a response. And I think Undertaker's style for these matches has basically boiled down to a big match spot fest, and that has its limits. And if it's a mess like Triple H match was, it's not going to be pretty, not for me anyway. In regards to Cena versus Punk, it was interesting, sort of going into it, and you're sort of thinking about, what sort of approach the WWE are going to take towards the attention that they're getting from the internet wrestling community, and whether they're going to pay any attention to that. That was quite interesting, and the match itself is good. I mean, there's some really awesome segments in it. Cena was pretty magnificent, working as this sort of ace, almost Hashimoto style, sort of working holds on the mat pretty well, surprisingly, but he was doing a good job of it. And then you've got the series of counters like FUs into the Anaconda Vice, which then went into the STF or something like that. There was just one of those chain of sequences which was really, really well put together. But then they went off into the finisher head drop sort of business. Although for them they're not using head drops as much, but it's that sort of 2.9 spamming stuff which can sometimes turn me off. And when I rewatched the match, that whole finish really didn't do anything for me. But the match that was before that was really awesome.
So, do you remember your percentages for both matches?
Yeah, I do. I think the Undertaker one, I actually gave a star rating rather than a percentage, so I didn't have to be so specific. But I think it was 2.25. And the John Cena versus CM Punk, I think was 84%.
Oh, well, that's still good amount of praise.
Yeah, for me.
Yeah. Well, what'd you rate the Daniel Bryan match?
Exactly the same rating of 84%. But when it came to having to rank the matches, I decided to bump Henry and Bryan up just a little bit more because I felt in 5 years' time, I'm going to want to watch Henry versus Bryan more than I'm going to want to watch Punk versus Cena again.
All right, we're running short on time. Before I get to the one question from Double Cross King, very quick. This is the lightning round. You can't think about it. You just have to say it. I'm going to name a promotion, and you have to tell me the best worker you feel from that promotion. And again, lightning round. So no thinking, just say it. WWE.
Cena. Fuck.
I know this is lightning round, but is that your actual opinion?
Henry.
Okay.
Mark Henry. Lock it in.
TNA.
Styles.
Noah.
Akiyama.
New Japan.
Nakamura. Shinsuke.
All Japan.
Oh, fuck.
You could say Akiyama again.
Geez.
You could say Akiyama again if you want.
No, if that counts, he's definitely the best guy there at the moment.
He's the champion. It's allowed to say that. Big Japan.
Sasaki Yoshito.
The 0-1.
Hashimoto.
And I know you don't watch a lot, but Dragon Gate.
Don Fuji. Actually, I can answer that. Definitely Don Fuji.
American Indies in general.
Can I answer with... actually, hang on. Does Finley count?
Not really.
Okay, regular Indies guy. Can I go with shit? Oh, I'll say Callahan.
Okay. And since he's not from Ring of Honor, let's just get a specific Ring of Honor name if you can name one as well. Ring of Honor.
Shit, I can't do this quick. I have to go through their roster.
You can
El Generico.
Okay.
He's good.
He's good?
I think so.
All right. So the ROH fans will appreciate your answer to that one. Now let's get to the questions from Double Cross King. His first question, which we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, is actually a statement that I will let you respond to.
Sure.
His statement is, "Oh my God, Cena sucks. Davey Eddie, Davey Tyler, 6 stars. You moron, stop overanalyzing, you virgin."
Okay, first, I dispute the notion that I'm a virgin. I don't want to have to prove that. Secondly, okay, I dispute the notion that I'm overanalyzing anything. Actually, no, I don't. I probably do overanalyze many things, but I dispute the fact that I overanalyze pro wrestling because I look at very simple things at the end of the day. Selling is a really simple thing. It's not complex. What is overanalysis is when people start talking about, symbolism in pro wrestling because it's just nonsense and it's not there. In terms of Cena being good, you know what? I'm actually going to make a video on my ordinary non-Japanese wrestling channel, which looks really rigorously into this idea of John Cena as a ring worker and whether he's good or not. So I guess I'll, delay the answer on that one.
And his next question, how is the transition from appreciating shoot elements in pro wrestling to appreciating wrestling elements in pro wrestling?
Pretty good, actually, because it opens up a whole array of stuff that you can enjoy. I mean, one of the guys I like, who I probably should have mentioned earlier, was Necro Butcher, who is absolutely the opposite of Volkan in terms of the way he works. But there's a certain, dare I say, elegance about the way he sort of staggers around like a hobo, punches people, and then takes horrifying bumps and sells them like death. So there's a whole sort of world of pro wrestling that opened up for me once I dropped the obsession with shoot technique. So it was good. And
his last question, how can I be an effeminate douchebag like you?
Oh, good old Jake. Okay, the secret, first and foremost, is to take hormones, female hormones. You will not get effeminacy without them. They're absolutely vital. Aside from that, you have to, like, a douchebag is a vaginal washing towel. So you have to know a woman that's very, very large and willing to use you in all sorts of peculiar ways.
Quite the burn. Well, Jake, I'm pretty sure you got your questions across and you got your responses that you wanted as well. He's probably going to post some retorts in the comment section. So
That'll be good. That'll be good.
all right. And before we go, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Not a problem at all.
I thought the interview was very, very insightful. One of the best ones I've done personally.
Oh, thank you.
And is there anything you would like to plug?
Aside from if you put a link to the Pro Res channel and the General Wrestling channel, that'd be good. Just so people know, I don't make videos that often, which actually is a good thing because I won't clog up your inbox. You'll just get a well-made video, in my opinion, every sort of few months. So your subscription will not result in spam. The other thing is, the PuroRes.tv forums. I mentioned earlier the John Cena video because I think a lot of the people that watch your channel will be interested in that more so than they'll be interested in the PuroRes nerding that I do. So those are about the only things.
The PuroRes forum, I'm a member of the forum. I do not post as much as I should.
Exactly.
But I will. Well, part of the reason is right now I'm currently getting back in track into the pro wrestling I missed. Right now I'm watching some Ring of Honor shows, and once I finish that, I have a list of 70 pro wrestling matches that I plan on watching. So
that's a lot.
Yeah. So once I get to that, I will be on the forum quite a lot, I would imagine.
Brilliant.
So the forum, for all you guys listening, it is a lot of.
That's you doing pimping for me.
Yeah.
You're plugging it. That's good. Thank you.
Good job. And with that, once again, I want to thank you, Daniel, for being on the show. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And with that, we are out. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.